There we go. Hi, everyone. I'm looking forward to having a conversation with this group about how technology is transforming the way that we buy, invest, rent, and live in our homes and apartments. So before we get into it, let's start off with some introductions. I'd love if everyone in the group can just do a quick introduction, your name, what you do, and why you're an expert to talk about this topic, and what is one thing that you're most excited to do once this pandemic is over and we can and the restrictions are lifted. So James, let's start with you.
Okay, thanks, Courtney. My name is James Dearsley. I'm the co-founder of Unisu, which is a sort of a community-driven marketplace platform that connects the buyers and sellers of all the property technology audiences all around the world and brings them into one place. It's hopefully the single source of all truth that you'd need to go on your journey of digital transformation in the real estate space. So I hope that's enough a little bit about that side. Really, in terms of this pandemic, I actually thought in the preview that you said, what do you want to do after this event? And I'm thinking, well, actually, what I want to do after this event is go and have a Domino's pizza with my boys and my wife and enjoy that. But no, you want to talk about after the pandemic. So I might have to rethink all of my my ideas on that one. But well, I don't think we're going to get back to some normality for some time. So to be honest, for me, I'm just getting used to the new normal.
Fair enough. Well, it is also almost dinner time in your neck of the woods. So
yeah, right.
After that, hopefully you can get your pizza. Reuven, it's turn over to you.
Hey everyone, my name is Reuven Gorsht. I'm the co-founder of DDID, and we're working to streamline the entire title and closing process for residential real estate. What I'd love to do after the pandemic is go on vacation somewhere warm on a beach and read a really good book.
Awesome. Ryan?
Yeah, hi, and thank you for having me, Courtney. My name is Ryan Kuhn. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Avail. Avail is a platform that simplifies the residential rental experience for more than 200,000 individual do-it-yourself landlords and about 500,000 renters all across the United States. Company's based here in Chicago and operates all across the country. After the pandemic, similar to Reuven, I'm really excited and eager to get back to traveling around the world. My wife and I had a trip to Japan that was booked back in April and May that I'm really looking forward to rescheduling after the pandemic and when it's safe to travel again.
Awesome. And last but not least, Andrew.
Hello, I'm Andrew Bourne. I'm a professor of practice at the Said Business School in the University of Oxford in the UK. I lead something called the Future of Real Estate Initiative, which is a funded research program with 12 companies behind us, including Facebook, EY, CBRE, and so on. And last year we put out a publication called The Future of Real Estate Transactions, so that white paper is available on our website, Future of Real Estate. After the pandemic's over, one thing, it's said that no man ever says on his deathbed that he wishes he'd spent more time in the office. But that's what I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to going back to the office, which just shows how boring I am, probably.
And you have one of the most downloaded papers about Proptech 3.0, I believe. So if anyone has not read that and is interested in Proptech, they have some of the best resources that exist, and in addition to what they have on Unisu. So yeah, so that would be great. And for me, I'm Courtney Cooper. I'm based in Toronto. I'm a principal at Elate Partners. So I invest in real estate technology companies across North America and hopefully abroad as well in the future. After the pandemic, I also had a trip to Japan booked in May. We luckily didn't book anything because we had seen that there might be sort of issues and complications there, but this trip was actually my honeymoon. So hopefully after the pandemic and we can travel and and have a party where we can bring people together and not have to worry about 6 feet. So, but I also miss going to the office. So
at least you got married. I mean, the amount of people who can't get married at the moment is incredible.
But we didn't get married.
Congratulations.
No, we didn't. We had a fake wedding. Oh. Yeah, no, we didn't. It's hard to plan. And you know what? We're just gonna wait. So
you'll get there.
We did buy a house, so this topic is even more relevant to me, and I just went through the process, and you know, I can tell you I understood the challenges and the opportunities within, you know, the whole home buying process, but going through it myself, I've never been more excited to be an investor who can invest in tech that can help streamline the process. So that gives me, you know, hope for what we can do and what some of the people on this call are building. So, you know, that's where we want to start. So Andrew mentioned the paper that he wrote, and this is a bit unfair, but I'm going to ask him to, you know, summarize his whole paper and whole research in a quick, in one question, just to, if you can, Andrew, just give us a little bit of overview of, you know, what you guys looked at in terms of how technology can help improve the transaction process and make it faster and less expensive for people who are buying homes and buying buildings.
Thank you very much, Courtney. I'm keenly aware that there are other people on this panel who know a lot more about the details of the process, and they've been working very hard on improving that process. So please bear in mind that I'm just an academic who's written about this stuff, and you know, writing and talking is cheap, doing things is much more difficult and more expensive. But like any academic, we started out trying to map the process. So we started trying to think about what is the transaction process, and how do you break it down into pieces. And you know, we can break it down into big pieces or small pieces, but the big pieces, we decided that, or we found that there's a preparation period where the property has to be made ready for sale. So the vendor has to decide to sell it, and they have to then think about what they need to do to get it ready for sale, be it talking to a broker, putting it on a portal, cleaning up some of the documents, maybe, if they think that far. And then there's a marketing period, and the marketing period is a period during which the negotiating starts, and people come and look at the home, and they start talking about pricing, and then we go through that sort of that marketing negotiation process. Once that's over, and the property is knocked down to somebody, and it's agreed that you, Courtney, are going to buy that apartment, and you've got the run on it, then you go into your due diligence period. And the due diligence period is the bit I would imagine that Reuven is working hard on, and this is the bit where lawyers get involved and the whole thing starts to drag, and people get frustrated by bits of paper going backwards and forwards. But the due diligence period, there's a very good reason why the due diligence period is long and tortuous. But that's the period where the buyer, who is responsible for taking the risk on the transaction, has to satisfy themselves that they're buying what they think they're buying, and that it doesn't come with any liabilities they didn't know about, and it's everything they thought it was going to be. So that period is very, very important. And then once that's over, in the UK, we then get to something called exchange of contracts. I'm not completely sure how it works in Canada, but then we have a post-completion period where all of the paperwork is tidied up, the land registration process takes place, and you become registered as the title holder. And that period can also be quite long-winded. It's not particularly important from the buyer's point of view, but it's important from the process point of view. So those three phases, they all have different characteristics, and they can all be speeded up by technology to a different extent. So, you know, we can talk about, for example, the preparation period. If we all had the common sense to hold digital files of all of the information relevant to our homes, then the preparation period would be much shorter, and the job of the due diligence provider would be a darn sight easier. But how many people in the world hold a digital file containing all the information about their home? The answer is, I certainly don't. I know that there's a filing cabinet over in the corner there that's got a file full of pieces of paper about this house that I'm in now. And I know my wife's got another filing cabinet downstairs with another file of papers. And I think we probably assume that our lawyer's got a file full of papers about stuff that we haven't got. And that there is stuff lying around in the local authority as well. And it's on, some of it's in paper, some of it's digital, and it's all over the place, frankly. And so it is any data about me as a human being. Frankly, I haven't got a digital data file about me. So I haven't got a digital data file about me. How can I expect to have one about my home? I think I'm more important than my home, and I don't even know enough about, I don't even know what my blood type is, let alone where I registered that. So human beings are not good at keeping digitally organized information. So that's the sort of the preparation period. The marketing period, you can inspect a property through drones, you can do virtual reality, you can look at the place, and that's all good. And of course, the advertising period, the portals that have taken over from the estate agents' windows, much more efficient than it was before. So we've got a much better process there. It's where it really hits the buffers is the due diligence period. And I think that's where we'll probably be talking a bit more about it. So I'll stop rambling on there, Courtney, but I think that's the sort of the starting point from my point of view.
No, that's great, and I think that it's good to sort of have a framework of which areas and what opportunities there are across the spectrum. So James, you talk to, you have lists of thousands of companies. You are very everyone in the space. Maybe we could talk a little bit more about who's taking the lead so far. And obviously iBuyers have come out in the last few years and become popular about being able to do a lot of this all at once, but then, so maybe it'd be interesting to hear your perspective on, who's far along, and what are some examples that people who are doing it well.
Yeah, sure. It's a tricky one. I covered some of this morning in the keynote that I had, sort of giving an overview on a local and a global level. And yes, you're right. We're currently tracking over 8,000 companies now within Unisu, and that gives us an incredible viewpoint of the market. But the way that I like to put it is I tend to break down the trends that I'm seeing in terms of the way that the money markets are viewing the sector and the way that the industry is viewing the sector, and it's a completely opposite trends in my view. If you look at all the research and where the money is being deployed at the minute, a lot of it is around what I would term as infrastructure investments. Smart cities, smart homes, the way that data is created, and the VCs are really betting on that is going to be an important sort of fuel in the future of this market. Whereas the industry is really investing its knowledge, learning, and intelligence in terms of what I call the emotional development of the market. And I break that down into three different areas, which is the consumers are really demanding certainty at the moment. And this doesn't matter if it's Canada, the UK, the US, the consumers want certainty. And that's where this trend for the iBuyer market has come from, because the iBuyers give people certainty. They guarantee that they will buy your property at a certain price, generally a little bit below the market value, but the trend is about certainty. There's another angle here, which is probably more along the lines of where Ryan comes from, which is around affordability. We're also seeing a tremendous trend at the minute for the market to look at how do we make this entire market of the buying and the selling and the renting more affordable. And there's an awful lot of sort of examples now of firms all around the world which are looking at that market and saying, we want to help renters to buy, because in a lot of areas that is a definite trend. And for those that are saying, no, we don't want to buy, because let's be honest, there is a transience amongst the population at the minute. It's how do we make the rental market more accommodating and more feasible? And that's where this whole affordability question comes in. And I'll touch on that in a little bit. And then the last angle on this, and this sort of third sort of point. So you've got the certainty, you've got affordability, and the third point is control. And we're seeing there's a real demand from the consumers about having control of a transaction. And Andrew just very aptly referenced that earlier on. And that despite the fact that we are not digitally aware and we're not digitally brilliant, there is definitely a trend for people to say, but I want to feel like I'm in control of a transaction. And that's where things like, and actually, I mean, just talking about the Canadian market, you had Purple Bricks previously come into the market, as an online fixed fee agent. The consumer knew what they were paying, they knew what they were responsible for. And actually the very clever bit about those markets is the onus of control went from the agent or the broker to the buyer and the seller. And they were able to pick the photos. They were able to upload the descriptions. They were able to choose where their photos got seen and in which order they get seen in. And it was a subtlety of change. Now, personally, going back to that certainty bit around the iBuyers, I'm pretty bearish about it. I think, you know, there's a significant move at the minute. You've got the open door SPAC, which is just about to sort of hit home. No SPAC has really ever landed. It's sort of overpromised and subsequently underdelivered. At times, I think open door are going for that quick route to market. They haven't made money. No iBuyer yet has really made significant gains. I'm a bit bearish, but I'm not looking at that. I'm looking at the fact it's a trend that the consumer is asking for. They want the certainty in the market. That affordability, that is definitely a global crisis which is happening. There is definitely a demand for giving power to the renters to say, well, actually, I want to make my rent payments and I want them to contribute to my credit scoring, or I want them to credit to actually this whole rent to buy model that we're starting to see in Spain and the UK, that I want my rent contributions to contribute towards me buying that home. This is a demand-led side now. So there's one thing, and I won't go on anymore, but VCs are looking at infrastructure, industry's looking at emotion, and it's a really powerful sort of contradiction at the minute going on in the market. Really interesting.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating, and there's a number of things I would love to dig into further. But you know, one of them that stands out is I think when you think about iBuyers, and when you talk to a lot of people who are in real estate and you know understand the market, they'd say like, why would anyone ever do this? Why would I ever want to agree to a price that I don't know is the best price? Like, why wouldn't I want to take it to market and get the best price and create a competitive environment? And I think to your point, these iBuyers are proving that, you know, it's not the whole market, you know, it's not going to be that everybody wants certainty, but there is absolutely a portion of the market that, you know, for whatever reason, they have to sell a home in a short period of time. They have kids that they're focused on and other concerns. And this is a very stressful environment for them. So, you know, in 6 months and, you know, am I going to be holding 2 homes? Like, these are their fears. And in that case, you know, and you hope, and the iBuyers say that they're going to be able to get to a place where, it isn't that much more expensive, or it is even on par. Like, that is the promise. The promise is not that it will always be, you know, 8 to 12% versus something lower that you could go if you go to market. But
the other thing, if I can as well on this point, I think one of the things you've got to remember is that not everybody is selling because they're upscaling, or they're, you know, it's a wonderful thing that they're moving house finally and it's aspirational and we're going. A lot of times they're for sales. And so people want that certainty. Now, the one thing I will say about the model is that, and even with Open Door, you know, like some crazy amount of their revenue comes from Phoenix. You know, not every sort of city is a Phoenix city. Therefore, they can't replicate the model out. And if they can only make it work in Phoenix, then it doesn't work elsewhere. And that's only in the States. It's not necessarily in all the other markets where iBuyers are going, actually, this is a good idea. Let's do that. And equally, the other thing about this is it's all around the AVMs. You know, you never want to have the second best AVM, because then you're screwed. Not everyone's going to have the same one.
But I think that the point here is on the upfront of the transaction, starting to actually use automated valuation models and starting to test them and figure out, you know, can we tell how valuable a home should be based on where it is compared to a school and a park? And does it matter whether or not it has a pool or a finished basement? And what is the impact of doing those kinds of renovations to get it to that place? So I think that on that perspective, they're taking a lead. You know, self-tours seems like a bit of an obvious one, but being able to have the agent or the buyer tour on their own, there's a lot of things that we're learning from some of these tech companies on that early part of the transaction. And then Ruben, maybe you can share a little bit more around what you're focused on. So, you know, once people go through the process and buy the home, you know, how are you thinking about how you can simplify that and create, you know, a positive journey there?
Sure, thanks, Courtney. So really picking up on some of James's themes around certainty and then the control. If you sort of look at how far we've come from digitizing the home buyer's journey, we have come a long way over the past couple of decades. So you can search for a home. We know that most searches begin digitally and on one of the portals, and there's some more advanced tools that are coming out. The pandemic, I think, has really pushed the envelope on touring properties sight unseen. So a lot of these virtual tour technologies have come to the forefront, at the very least, in a way to kind of narrow down some choices around properties, minimize visits. Obviously, the next step is the contracting, where companies like DocuSign over the past decade have really become the standard or the staple by which, you know, contracts are signed. Now, when you get to the back end, which is a lot of the points that Andrew's mentioned earlier, it really becomes very manual, and it's a disparate process where you've got complexity on one side, but on the other side, you've really got a lack of consistent data. If you think about like closing, which is essentially putting a bow on the entire transaction, but also working with multiple parties like the lender, obviously the homeowner, the real estate agent, mortgage broker, appraiser. There's multiple parties that are involved. But when it comes down to getting some of that data to essentially speed up the process and make it as smooth as possible for all parties involved, we're still at the mercy of having these either manual sources. So for example, one of the points that we tackle in the process is validating taxes paid, so validating the tax bill and so on. And we find most municipalities across North America actually haven't digitized the process, meaning you can't go on an online portal and just grab a copy of your tax bill. You've got to call, you've got to pay a service fee. That tax bill is usually faxed, if not emailed to you. And that's just one of the many friction points that exist. But obviously as the industry matures and overall, you know, other industries and other parties become more digital, then we've got momentum and an opportunity to really streamline everything in the process, which is what we're focused on essentially. How do you make that closing experience, to Andrew's point, eliminate a lot of the friction? Our process in North America is slightly different than the UK, whereas due diligence is mostly done through the buyer, seller, and the real estate agent and various parties. So you do have some sort of firm contract or homes that go under contract, but still bringing it down to a point where everything is closed and essentially, you know, the buyer gets their keys or the seller gives away their keys, or even a borrower gets their mortgage funded, is still unfortunately a very manual process, which we are digitizing every step of, putting in as much automation as we can, and really waiting for those data sources to eventually catch up so that it does become a more seamless and more automated process.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because, you know, we're in Toronto, or I am, at least I know Reuven and I are, and here trying to buy a place is so competitive that, you know, people are making offers with no conditions. So, you know, you're taking, if they have a home inspection, some people are offering without a home inspection and just saying, you know, we'll take it, no inspection, no financing conditions, like it is, and places have, you know, if you're looking at houses around $1 million, like houses have 15 offers. So, and they so it is quite a process. So, you know, ideally, you know, back to Andrew's point, if you had all the information that was actually digitized and you didn't have to worry about the inspection or the inspection, the information was already there, it would give a lot more certainty in markets where you're making these decisions very quickly. But then, you know, there's many other benefits. So I guess just back to Andrew a little bit, I'd love to hear your thoughts on, you know, what part do you, like, how much do you think can be instantaneous? Like, can we make the whole process, you know, essentially online or digital? Or are there specific things that are going to hold us back from having that sort of dream quote unquote digitized process?
I think Courtney, that yes, it could be pretty much instantaneous if we had two things. So the two things, Reuven's referred to the one big impediment, which is the fact that not all of the data that you need to have confidence to buy a building is digitalized and available at short notice. We have to remember the sort of the legal principle of contract law, which is caveat emptor, the buyer beware. So the buyer is at risk. If something goes wrong in the transaction, it's the buyer's fault. You know, if they make a bad decision, it's not the vendor's fault, it's the buyer's fault. So given that the buyer is probably spending more money than they've ever spent before, and not all of it is their money anyway, they and the lender are both going to be pretty concerned about the due diligence process. So they need a lot of data. That data will not be held universally in digital format. You take a simple example like the land registry in the UK. So the proof of title, for example, you wouldn't want to buy a property unless you could prove that the person selling it to you owns the property in the first place. So that title is held, that title information is held in the land registry. The land registry is non-digital, and it's non-digital for a very good reason, because most of the origins of the boundaries of property are drawn by pencil, you know, and the width of a pencil could be a meter on the ground. Now, the land registry works to something called the principle of the general boundary. So it doesn't claim to know exactly where your boundary is. It's basically between you and your neighbor to make sure they don't disagree about it. If you tried to digitalize the land registry, you'd have hundreds of thousands of claims and disputes about where the boundary actually sits, because the digital representation might be slightly different from what's on the ground. So the land registry just can't digitalize yet. So if we jumped over that barrier and we ended up with a digital land registry, all of the information to do with the property and all of the things in the property digitalized, which is perfectly feasible and possible, but long-winded. And exactly as Reuven said, you know, you've got so many different bodies, some of which are municipal authorities that don't have the funding to produce the digital. But, you know, let's assume we get over all that and we get to a point where everything's digitalized. The second issue is that because the buyer is taking the risk, the buyer needs to be comfortable that they have done their due diligence, they understand what's in the digital file. So, okay, you've got the digital file, you read all the information, the house looks okay, but it's going to take you a while to make sure that you're comfortable with all this stuff. And, you know, if the documentation includes things like, well, where are new roads going to be built? What development's going to go on in this area? You're going to dig around quite a lot, you know, and what schools are going to be built in the area. It's not something you can do in 3 hours. You know, you're going to take a bit of a time to do this, and you're going to sort of make your exploration. The only reason why you would do it very quickly would be if you could attach an insurance product to the digital file. Then if the digital file were insured, then you could really short circuit the process down to, let's say, a week. So the 1 week would then be spent by the purchaser, making sure they're familiar with all the stuff that's in the digital file, making sure they're comfortable, that they know what they're buying. That 1 week would be quality time spent on really thinking about it. And then you could exchange contracts within a week with all the digital information, knowing that that any mistake that you're making based on false information is insured, and you can claim against your insurance policy if anything goes wrong. But we don't yet have that universal insurance policy. We don't yet have the digital information. And they're the two things that would make the thing collapse from, let's say, 3 months to 1 week in principle. I'd love to know what Reuven and Ryan think about that, and James.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point, Andrew. So in North America, I think, you know, so on the insurance aspect, title insurance has become pretty standard, and even so much as a requirement from a lot of lenders to have. So we've got a lot of that infrastructure solved, and same with digitization of land registries. Every country, and in the US, you've got, you know, different jurisdictions are in a different place in terms of how far things have been digitized and so on. So infrastructure is slowly coming together. What I've seen sort of happen in the last 7 months since the pandemic hit us has actually been a great accelerator for the industry, as it has for a lot of other industries. And that's sort of primarily some of the tools and policies to become more digital friendly. One key example of that is something that's referred to typically as remote online notarization. So whereas typically legal documents had to be signed, and especially legal documents to do with land transfers or mortgage, had to be signed in person in front of a lawyer, a notary, or title agent. What we've seen is a tremendous shift in terms of accelerating the acceptability of remote online notarization. I believe 27 US states are now on remote online notarization. I know in Canada, all our provinces to an extent have also allowed remote notarization, which again opens up a whole realm of possibilities for speed and scale. I know we've got various clients that have gone through the process, and it's a lot easier, especially when you have restrictions around leaving the home or going into face-to-face meetings, and especially in situations where things need to be turned around literally over a few hours or a few minutes, you've got that flexibility of getting on a video call, signing documents, etc. The other side of it is really, Andrew, I think you made a point around the general acceptance of all the players in the industry. So we need to be on at least an agreed upon standard, because if any given party in the process is non-digitized or has their own policies that don't accommodate the entire process, essentially flowing digitally, then obviously we hit a roadblock. And what we've seen over the last 7 months or so with COVID is a lot of the players, from lenders to appraisers and so on, which were generally slower to adopt some of these changes to do business more digitally, accept digital signatures, digital appointments, in the appraisal world. Virtual walkthroughs where, visiting the physical property was not an option in the midst of a complete lockdown. And that, that sort of diving in the deep end has really created a lot of long-lasting change in terms of how these practices are done, what tools are deployed, and obviously will enhance the digitization of the process. So I think we've seen an acceleration of the timeline in the last 7 months. We've probably seen close to a decade and change in terms of really having a compelling event to rally around and implement some of these digital transformations.
And I think that this has been touched on a number of times with, consumers wanting control and certainty, as well as just, making the buyer feel comfortable. And so I think there's an aspect of it where you can digitize, so much of the process, so that, like, why do I have to enter things in manually in different places? Like, that shouldn't exist. Signing documents, everything should be easy, but you're still going to need, at least for first-time home buyers, but likely a lot of the population, they'll still gonna need to talk to someone. Maybe they don't need to talk to a lawyer and a realtor and a mortgage broker and an inspector but they are going to want some people to help them because they're not familiar with these documents or process, and this is the biggest financial transaction of their life. So I think that we'll see sort of interesting transitions in people's roles and what that interaction is like for the home buyer. I do want to transition over to sort of the rental side of the experience and give Ryan a chance. Oh, James?
Yeah, just one really quick thing, which I think is
absolutely.
and I'm sorry, Ryan, because I'm really conscious that you haven't gone into it, which is why I said, let's talk about rentals in the first bit. But there's one really important point, which I think we all can forget, and we're really guilty of, which is we're talking about Toronto, we're talking about, London. And we're talking about this whole aspect, which I mentioned about certainty, affordability, and so on. We're forgetting the fact that we're in such an established position of much, what's the right word? Ability to have this sort of technological change. Some of the markets which I've had the great pleasure of flying to do conferences at, in Africa and in South America and in establishing economies in India and the Far East, they're nowhere near this stuff. And whilst I often talk about there's a real sort of mentality and an infrastructure shift, which is going to impact change. These emerging nations have all got a mentality to force change through, and they may not have the land registry like Andrew's mentioned. And in some cases, that's a negative, but actually in a lot of cases, it's a massive positive. So I think as much as we think we're in a really established and good position, we've actually got to take a real look at some of the emerging economies and the way that they don't have to undo what has been, centuries long. And this, the massive behemoth of the title insurance market we've got in the US, which is going to fight to the death to protect itself. When there's emerging economies which are going to go, we haven't got any of that. Let's start as if we're from the ground up and let's improve it from the start. So I think we're both very privileged to have such security and protection, but also we're at a massive risk for being completely undone by emerging economies. And we all know that the transparency of a property market, whether it's sales or rentals, drives inward investment. And we could be massively outdone in the next decade or the next generation by having a very poor and very lack-worthy transient market in both our buying and our renting, actually, in this case.
Yeah, I think to that point, James, there's a lot in Africa where they skipped the whole kind of 1990s communication infrastructure, and they just leapfrogged up to mobile technology. And we could see that happen in real estate as well.
They have. The only problem they have got is obviously they've got a massive black market in terms of the money. So what you've also got in the Proptech side, you've got a Proptech and FinTech symbiosis, which is always there. And Andrew's talked about that from the very beginnings in his Oxford University papers, which is there is a massive symbiosis between the two. And actually, in some cases, especially Africa, they are a mobile first digital platform for financial transactions as well. So they've almost got a really exciting period of change, I think, if they can sort out their own fraudulent activities.
Yeah, absolutely. So Ryan, I do want to come back to you and talk on the rental side. So, obviously that's sort of the space you're in, and you're helping the majority of people who are renters or who rent out their properties. I think that the experience varies so significantly. Like the place I moved from, my landlord was paper checks and physical signatures and, lots of angry text messages to try to get anything done. So, I think a lot of the world, especially if we look globally, looks like that. So maybe you can talk to us a little bit about, what is happening in the rental space, and where is technology helping today, and where are you sort of building towards?
Yeah, well, so I think if we take a step back first and we look at the overall rental experience, the rental journey, there's really these 5 main parts of that. So everything from finding a place to live and that matchmaking that occurs, to that screening or that due diligence process that Andrew mentioned on the purchase side, all the way to creating and signing a lease agreement with your prospective landlord, to making your rent payment, to submitting maintenance tickets and having those taken care of. Throughout each of those 5 parts of the rental journey, and no matter where you are around the world, it's these 5 parts. And I really believe that technology is improving each step of that process. I think themes that we're seeing throughout all of those is really that technology is, number one, and probably most important, it's really improving communication. So I know that 10 years ago, when I was living in an apartment here in Chicago, I would have to text message my landlord, and then a year later, I moved into a new place and I had to call them. And then this other one, they had their online portal. So I think some sort of standardized communication streams will be key. That communication ultimately just builds connectivity. It creates these stronger communities. The next theme that I'm really seeing is around data and transparency. There's, unfortunately, around the world, there's so much fraud that happens whenever large sums of money are involved. We see it, unfortunately, here in the States, where about 1/3 of all rental listings that are actually created on some of these different portals are fraudulent. They're actually spammers or fraudsters that will go on to one of the big portals, they'll grab photos, they'll create that listing because the barriers are so low. And there's no source of truth in terms of who actually owns this unit. So I think all of that data that's being collected, that standardization of the data will ultimately help bring down all the information asymmetry that exists. It'll create more transparency and more efficiency. And then I think lastly, and number 3, technology is ultimately just helping people save time. As a landlord myself, as a renter a number of years ago, I know that by doing all of those different processes or those different steps through a lot of different kind of pen and paper check, Excel spreadsheet, as soon as you standardize things and you bring them all into one place and you simplify the communication and you've got good data, it ultimately creates a more efficient market. It creates more efficiencies for landlords and ultimately a better overall customer experience for the renter, which I think is what we're all after.
I'm curious, this one for Ryan or anyone on the call, do you have an idea of where we are in the process in terms of, tenants paying online, or, like just when we're trying to understand where are we in the cycle towards a more digitized and digital renter experience? Do you have any sort of stats that you could share on the market that help put it into context?
Yeah. Well, so I can speak very, very well about the market here in the States. And here in the United States, there's about 48 million residential rental housing units. About half of those units are institutionally owned. They're owned by the big REITs and hedge funds and family offices. those properties, those units tend to be professionally managed. And they've been using technology, albeit clunky technology, for 10, 20, 30 years now. And that technology that's available to institutional owners works pretty well. The other half of the market here in the States is actually the rental units are actually owned and managed by men and women like all of us here on the call, who are busy full-time professionals. They're doctors, they're bankers, they're attorneys, they're venture capitalists. They own rental properties either to build passive income or to save money for retirement. And unfortunately, these individual, what we call do-it-yourself landlords here at Avail, historically, they haven't had access to those same professional grade tools and resources that the pros have. And so here in the States, I think it's roughly 25% or so of rent payments are made electronically. I think a lot of that is largely concentrated on that institutional part of the market. And really what we're trying to solve here at Avail is bringing that same tools, resources, process, and education to the non-institutional, the non-professional landlord.
Courtney, I did want to make the comment that if we're looking for serious, deep digital advancement, we're most likely to see it in the rental market than in the house for sale market, because of the participation of these highly professional platforms like Greystar and so on, who are going to build really good tech platforms for exactly the reasons that Ryan pointed out. Whereas the house sales market is almost, it's 99.9% non-professional. We are starting to see property funds being put together for single family homes, but they're there for rental. So there's no real equivalent apart from the iBuyers, presumably. And I share James's point about iBuyers. I think they are a temporary phenomenon personally. So I think that the rental market is going to show a bit of a lead, I think, in this area.
Let's just ask one question of Ryan. Did you just say 25% of rent is paid electronically?
Yeah, that's right. That's based on a Federal Reserve study or piece of research, I believe, that was put out a year or two ago. So that number may be a little bit dated. Everyone else
find it astounding. So 75% of rent is paid how?
It's paid paper check, cash, money order, kind of all of these antiquated offline methods.
It's insane.
Yeah.
I think that's the high case. I think in some markets, I know the number is much lower. It's literally a standard when you sign a lease, you handwrite 12 checks and you hand it to your landlord, and they go to the bank and deposit them. It's unreal.
And your landlord may or may not deposit them on the right day. Then they have checks, and it also doesn't give you control over when money is coming in and out of your bank account.
Well, and you wonder why companies like Elate are excited about investing in the world of real estate technology, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think that you made my point for me, Ryan, is that, a lot of the technology is dated, is early. We're starting to get great experiences. We're starting to get people paying online, but, it's not the majority.
Well, and I think just one last point, and James, I think you touched on it earlier, is there's beginning to be more effort spent on transitioning from renter to home buyer. And it sounds like, Courtney, you and I just made this kind of transition over the past year or so. I know that one of the things that we're doing here at Avail is helping renters have their on-time rent payments reported to the credit bureaus. I mean, that's only possible when the transactions are electronic and when they flow through one central platform, because an individual landlord out there who's receiving checks, they really have no, number one, capability, number two, incentive to have those payments reported. And so that's another just opportunity where technology can really transform the overall customer and renter experience.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm taking a look if there's any questions. I think right now we have a couple comments, but if you have any questions, please enter them now, and we can direct them to the questions. To the panelists. We have about just less than 10 minutes left, but I also have lots of questions I can keep asking if there aren't any specific ones. So in terms of another topic that we had started to talk about and we've touched on is sort of when we think about where he will start the process. A lot of it right now, right now, I don't know what the number is, but vast majority of people are going online as in some part of their process. When they're starting to look at rental homes, they're starting to look at buying homes, they're taking a look online. They probably end up at the Zillas, or Zooplas, or Realtor.cas. I mean, Andrew, we were talking about this a bit before. I'd be curious to hear some of your thoughts on what you've been seeing about the evolution of portals and where, where they're going from, from just sort of listing services and ad-based to, moving more and more towards the transaction.
Yeah, it's a fascinating subject, this. And in order to understand, I think, the direction of travel of the portals, you need to understand their revenue model. So we have a dominant portal in the UK called Rightmove, and a second position in Zoopla, and the industry constantly trying to produce a third mover, which is somewhat controlled by the brokers to try and fight back against the loss of their market share. And you take these three players in the market, so you've got the estate agents, traditional estate agents, trying to create their own portal to control the business. You've got the market leader, and the market leader's revenue model is derived 95% from the estate agents who are paying them a monthly fee for putting the properties on the portal. And then you've got the challenger business, which is being much more creative, much more innovative in trying to disrupt the market and trying to produce value add software, services, and so on. And if you look to the market leader is probably not going to do any innovating, because if they started to move towards facilitating transactions online, then they would be in danger of damaging their primary revenue base from the estate agents, whereas the challenger business could probably take more of a risk in that area. And I don't know enough about Zillow, but Zillow has moved more towards that sort of that business. And of course, these businesses are fantastically placed to build AVMs. They've got all the data, they know the market, and Zoopla are already well into the AVM game, whereas Rightmove aren't. So I think you've got this interesting war about to take place, and frankly, I would defer to James and to Reuven to work out where it's going to go, and particularly James, who's been working in the estate agency sector in the UK. I mean, where do you think this is going, James? Sorry, Courtney, you're the chairperson. I shouldn't be asking questions, but I am genuinely interested in what James thinks about this.
I don't think it's good news unless you're a shareholder of a portal. And I also think that they've got some really murky waters to steer. I think Rightmove, well, let's just start with one thing. Your point about the leading portals always struggling to innovate, you're absolutely damn right. The book, The Innovator's Dilemma, absolutely speaks to the models of some of these markets like Zillow and Rightmove. And Zillow had this little problem when they started launching their own sort of almost direct-to-consumer product. It absolutely screwed the one market that was giving them the revenues, and it's a massive risk. And I think in Rightmove's case, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's about 80% plus of all their revenues comes from the brokers, the estate agencies. What Zoopla did in the UK was a very, very clever thing, which is when about 4 or 5 years ago, when this third portal in the UK came in to basically disrupt the top two, it screwed Zoopla completely. Because they basically instigated a thing of saying, well, you can list on us, we're an agent-friendly portal, but you can't list on both of the other portals. So everyone stayed with Rightmove and they left Zoopla. What Zoopla did was they did very, very cleverly. They then went horizontal along the value chain, and they invested in everything that a buyer had to do. So things like the data, things like changing of services, and they just went along the horizontal value chain. Really clever move, which meant only 25% of all of the revenues by Zoopla were now dependent on the agents. So companies like Zoopla, whilst the profits aren't as much, the risk for them to pivot straight away into a more transaction-orientated relationship is there. Now, I actually think that there is a high chance that all around the world, because this isn't just a UK trend and a US trend, which I see so often. We're talking Germany, we're talking Australia as other pivotal markets where there's a dominant player. it is a natural move, because I don't think the iBuyer market is particularly long term. I don't think the online agency market, with the drastically cut fees promising the world to everyone, is a brilliant market. I do think that the portal's route to market to bypass everything, they've already got the brand, and it's the brand that is really what people want. You know, take Purple Bricks, right, which are obviously moved into Canada. They've raised, what, $300 million. They couldn't go into Australia. They couldn't go into America. They couldn't go into Canada. And they've had to sort of do a massive retreat back, because the amount of money they were spending on the branding to get into the people's sort of knowledge, they couldn't do it. So if there's a dominant portal which has got the brand, it's got the buyers, it's evidently got the sellers, for me, it's a natural step. I'm sorry to break the hearts of every broker, but it's not. It doesn't take rocket science, I'm afraid.
And so I think we are nearing the end of our time. So I want to give Ryan and Reuven an opportunity to weigh in and give us some last words. So maybe Ryan, I mean, this is an area where you have the relationship with the renter, you have the relationship with landlords. So I'm very curious to hear what your thoughts on how this industry is evolving.
Yeah, well, I think that one of the big things that we see, Courtney, is that technology is here to stay, and that people will continue using technology when it can either help them save time, save money, make things simpler and more efficient. So ultimately, the technology that's here will continue to be a big part of the industry that we're all a part of. And then lastly, I think that the data that Andrew has touched on, James touched on, and Reuven have touched on a number of times, like, I think ultimately this is, at the end of the day, a data-driven industry, and data will help all participants make better, more informed decisions, and will ultimately lead to a more transparent and more efficient market.
I think just to add to that, in my mind, you know, and putting technology aside, the winners in this market will be those that can essentially, you know, go back to James's opening point in terms of what consumers are looking for, and in particular, certainty and the control and that transparency. In no industry do you have so much fragmentation and vagueness and stress and frustration. I think ultimately, a lot of the examples that we've discussed today, whether it's portals or companies like ours that are doing interesting things in this space, our ultimate goal is to help curate and take the friction out of that experience for the consumer, so that, you know, whether if it's renting a home or selling a home or buying a home, becomes a lot less frictionless. Now, it'll probably never be as simple as a one-click order on Amazon, but it does have the potential to get a lot easier and remove a lot of that friction for the consumer. And I think ultimately that's the holy grail. No matter which business models are out there, I think all of them are sort of squarely aimed at innovating around that experience, whether if it's through a one-stop shop, and James, as you mentioned, adding a whole bunch of value-added services and one place to go to get your transaction done, or really being good at a specific niche and putting the various elements of simplicity and data around it to, again, make it much simpler for the consumer.
Thank you. Well, I think that basically wraps up our time today. You know, I really appreciate the conversation with all of you. I have a long list of things that I would love to continue, and I feel like we could be speaking about this for hours. I mean, it's I do really like the way James put it around really thinking about certainty, affordability, control. Like, I think all of us are saying that, you know, buying a home, when you're looking to rent a home, when you're looking to buy, you know, when you're trying to deal with your landlord today, there's often, you know, pretty horrendous experiences. And as simple as just having to do things really manually when you should be able to just click a button and be able to import your financial information or, you know, address, things like that. Like, just a lot of rework, a lot of manual things. And, you know, from a landlord perspective too, it's not a pleasant process to be dealing with your tenants and trying to figure out, you know, how your properties are doing. So, you know, we're very early in what the experience, when we all think about what the experience could be. We're sort of just at the start of using technology. And I think that if it can, it's not going to, my personal opinion, and I think this is sort of shared, is that, we're not going to eliminate people in the process. Like, this is the biggest decisions that you make in your life, and you're going to need advisors and coaches and advice and training. But the technology can help take away some of the worst parts. So I think there's a lot to look forward to, and really great to speak with each of you today. So thank you to the Drastic conference for having us, and thank you to everyone for tuning in.